Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's special council meeting on August the 8th, 2022. The City of Kitchener has aligned with provincial changes to COVID-19 restrictions, and City Hall is now open for in-person services, but appointments are still being encouraged. The City remains committed to the safety of our patrons and staff and continues to facilitate electronic meeting participation for members of the public who choose to do so. Those people interested in participating in future meetings electronically can register by completing the online delegation registration form at www.kitchener.ca/delegation or via email at delegation@kitchener.ca. For those who are interested in accessing the meeting live stream video, it's available on YouTube or at www.kitchener.ca/watchnow. I do want to also take this opportunity to welcome everyone to the first in-person special council or council meeting since March of 2020. It's got to say, it kind of feels special to be back in the room together and see members of council around the horseshoe along with members of our staff. As we gather this afternoon, I'd like to begin by acknowledging that this afternoon we're gathering on the traditional territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples. We recognize our responsibility to serve as stewards for the land and honor the original caretakers who came before us. Our community is enriched by the enduring knowledge and deep-rooted traditions of the diverse First Nations, Métis, and Inuit in Kitchener today. We have a number of items on today's special council meeting, as well as an authorization to go in camera for a number of items. And the first item on our agenda this afternoon is a staff report on Project Empathy, Empowered, Thriving, and Happy Youth. And in that respect, colleagues, it gives me great pleasure to reintroduce everyone to Brianna Acosta, who joined our team at the City here for the past 10 weeks as part of the Bloomberg Harvard City Leadership Initiative Fellowship Program. Council will recall that the fellowship is a 10-week program where a Harvard graduate student is paired with the municipality to help bring analytical, collaborative, and creative problem-solving skills to advance a key city priority. From the city, the student receives access to and works with the mayor and senior leaders, guidance from a dedicated supervisor, who has been Lorianne Palabeski, and the opportunity to apply diverse skill sets to the project through reflecting on current practices, using data and evidence, and developing approaches to help solve a challenge facing our residents. From Harvard, the student receives faculty advisory support and access to a peer network. The City of Kitchener was fortunate to be selected for the opportunity for an internship program as part of our continued participation in the Bloomberg Harvard City Leadership Initiative and our application to focus on supporting youth mental health as Kitchener emerges from the pandemic. I want to personally, on behalf of the city, thank former New York Mayor Mike Bloomberg and Bloomberg Philanthropies for making this opportunity possible. Before passing the floor to Brianna Acosta, I'd like to also acknowledge that in light of today's topic being something that's also of interest to our federal and our provincial colleagues, we've invited local MPs, Mike Maurice, Valerie Bradford, Tim Lewis, and Bardish Chagger, as well as MPPs Catherine Fife, Laura May Lindo, Jess Dixon, and Mike Harris to join us. Mike Maurice and Valerie Bradford are here in the audience. Welcome to both of you. I guess that makes you our first official visitors to a council meeting as well, so thank you. And I know a number of the others are joining us virtually, and so I want to thank them for joining us virtually as well. And so now it gives me great pleasure to give the floor to Brianna Acosta to present the fruits of her labors throughout her time here in Kitchener. Brianna, over to you.
Thank you so much, Mayor. Thank you everyone for allowing me the opportunity to be here today and tell you about my labor of love, which has been Project Empathy Kitchener. And as the Mayor said, it stands for Empowered, Thriving, and Happy Youth. Now, before I launch into the results of my project, I did want to lay out a few of the overarching principles that I use to guide my approach to this work, as well as the methods that I use to come to my conclusions. So as you'll see up there, there are several, but just due to time, I'm going to quickly touch on the last one and explain what I mean by prevention and upstream social determinants of health. By this, I simply mean, in approaching this work, I really focused on the conditions in which youth live, work, play, and study that impact their well-being. Now, in regards to the methods, I first analyzed the current state of youth mental health and well-being by studying over 20 different surveys, reports, and other publications from the local context that are related to this topic. I then elaborated on this information and filled in some of the gaps using direct engagement with over 100 youth and their families, as well as staff from over 20 different community partners. As you'll see here, what exactly did I find? I have identified areas of strength as well as opportunities for improvement in the local context. So again, due to time, many of these are self-explanatory, but I am gonna explain a few of them. So the last one on the strength side, what I'm referring to as funding innovations are really efforts by various entities, including the City of Kitchener, to improve the quantity, accessibility, flexibility, and/or sustainability of funding. And this is particularly funding that community-based organizations use to serve youth and their families. Moving over to the opportunity side, the first bullet there may not surprise many of us, unfortunately, but just to really drive the point home of how significant this increase was, for example, all youth in Waterloo Region under 18 who are accessing community-based mental health services, that number has increased by over 200% since the beginning of COVID. And then right below that bullet, you'll see the social context surrounding youth. And that really just means all the people in youth's lives that impact their well-being, which is really all of them. So whether it's their families, their peers, neighbors, teachers, really anyone they interact with. And in that category, a couple of themes emerged pretty strongly. One was bullying, another discrimination, and then also youth reported struggling a lot in their relationships with their parents and other adults in their lives due to often feeling like their experiences and concerns were dismissed or not taken seriously. And then on the parent side, parents often expressed a desire and a need for more support in developing healthy relationships with their kids. And this was particularly strong among parents of racialized and LGBTQ+ youth. So, what am I proposing that we do about the situation? Well, I have identified 6 youth-driven solutions that address many of the opportunities for improvement that I just mentioned and leverage many of the strengths. So you'll see here that at the bottom of the solutions are quotes from my participants that I feel really embody the need for each solution. And then at the top, you'll see a check mark if the solution involves opportunities for the city to collaborate with community partners. And just a disclaimer, all of the solutions involve partnership opportunities. So to start off, the first solution would have the city co-create with youth a new dedicated stream of the RISE Fund. And so that, of course, is the Racialized and Indigenous Supports for Equity Fund. This would enable racialized and Indigenous youth to implement their own ideas of how to improve youth well-being and inequities in their communities. And this would, of course, involve more intensive city support that's youth-friendly, such as, for example, a peer learning component that would enable youth grantees to regularly come together to learn from each other and network. And this, of course, would be started as a pilot. The second solution involves the city helping to amplify and diversify youth voices. So the first part of this solution would be for the city to co-create with youth a new communication strategy for all city youth programming. So this really gets at the access barrier of lack of knowledge among youth about what supports and what opportunities even exist for them. And this barrier was particularly associated with city programs in my research, hence its inclusion here. I'm envisioning this strategy really focusing on reaching more equity-deserving youth in particular, involving direct outreach to youth in their communities and neighborhoods, as well as what they call, I guess, a school champions program, which would leverage teachers and other school staff to help promote city programs. The second part of this solution would have the city involve KAYAK, or the Kitchener Youth Action Council, as a co-creation and accountability partner, more long-term for the work that comes out of Project Empathy. And the final part would be for the city to co-create, once again with youth, a set of principles that the city agrees to abide by in all of its youth engagement activities. And so these would include things like paying youth for their time and labor and feedback, providing transportation to and from engagement activities, as well as interpretation services, amongst other things. The third solution would have the city learn collaboratively from the city of Kingston on their model of free public transit for youth. So in case anyone's not aware, currently in the city of Kingston, essentially all youth in grades 12 and under currently have free access to public transport. And this for them has been really transformational in having youth's ability to access supports related to mental health, ability to engage in preventive activities such as recreation and wellness, even ability to get to school. And it also really boosted their independence and their confidence in terms of traveling alone or with friends. So this would essentially be piloted at the city through the city youth programs. So the city would select certain youth program staff and attendees to receive free year-round bus passes that the city would purchase. And then eventually this would be expanded to all youth involved in the city in some way, whether as staff or attendees. And then eventually as well, the city could collaborate with partners to advocate for this expansion to Kitchener schools and hopefully eventually the entire region. The fourth solution addresses the gap in current supports that currently exist for the young adult age group of 18 to 24. Unfortunately, a lot of youth programs cut off their eligibility at age 18, and while adult supports do exist, oftentimes this population is not able or doesn't feel comfortable accessing them. So this would essentially build on current city programs to create a youth drop-in program for this particular population. And it would really be targeted at the needs that this population has expressed, such as academic and employment support, mentorship opportunities, wellness and recreation. And most of these sites would essentially be for anyone in this population, but one site in particular, or more than one if needed, would be specifically for those who, excuse me, who have disabilities and or mental health issues due to the fact that this gap disproportionately affects them. The fifth solution is essentially to kind of address the accessibility barrier when it comes to more specialized mental health services like therapy, for example. And so this would essentially bring non-specialized supports to places where youth already are. So in this case, it would be city programs and services for youth. So this would involve mandatorily training all city staff who work directly with youth in mental health first aid and equity and intersectionality issues. So if you're not familiar, mental health first aid is an evidence-based curriculum that really seeks to increase trainees' knowledge about mental health. Thank you. Excuse me. Increase trainees' knowledge about mental health, increase their ability to assist others with mental health issues, and then as well improve their own mental health. And among my participants, youth and families were really explicit about the fact that these two issues of mental health and equity were really inseparable, which is why both are involved in this particular training. And finally, the last solution would involve the city helping to make the access to and navigation of supports available for youth well-being basically easier for families of youth and youth themselves, of course. So there are two particular ideas that youth and families really push forward in terms of recommendations. One is the creation of a centralized place, a database, for them to access any information related to children and youth programs and services. And this was seen to be, I guess, most useful if it was region-wide. The other initiative surrounds parental support that I mentioned, specifically for parents of racialized and LGBTQ+ youth. And this was specifically asked for, which was peer-to-peer parent support, so non-specialized. Now, these two are not initiatives that the city could necessarily do on its own, but I see a lot of potential for the city to convene partners, for the city to convene partners around these initiatives and really push them forward. That's all I have for you. Thank you so much for your time, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Well, wonderful. What an amazing presentation, and what a volume of work you've been able to put together over the short period of time that
Yes.
that you've been here in the city. You know, in reading the report, the fact that you were able to connect with as many community partners as you did, the number of people that, the number of youth and their families that you connected with, and so on to help inform this report, I think has been tremendous, and lots of good, practical, both shorter term and longer term recommendations that are here. So I want to really thank you for all of those efforts. We do have some questions, Brianna. We'll start with Councillor Chapman.
Thank you. And thank you for the report and for all the work you've done over the last 10 weeks, I guess, 9.5 weeks. Thank you so much. My question has to do with variations across class lines. Did you look at that? How does it fit into your report? And I know there can be, it's not sort of a sole category either. I realize that. I know there's intersectionality with other categories that you've mentioned. So could you speak to that a bit?
So I'm just not sure. Is the camera capturing her there, or do you want her back at the podium? You're good? Okay. No, you can stay there, Brianna. Go ahead.
Trying to follow the rules. Oh, it works now. Okay.
Yep. Oh, you turned it off. Hang on. Can you just press the button again? There you go. You're good to go.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So yes, to answer your question, I did definitely consider income. One of the core principles of my entire approach to this work was equity and intersectionality. I will say though, due to limited time and things of that nature, I wasn't able to obtain quantitative data on all of the different equity deserving groups, and actually low income was one of those groups in particular. However, there was some, for example, even prior to the pandemic, lower income individuals or lower income youth specifically faced higher rates of suicide and self-harm, and as well as mental health disorders in general. But there wasn't much more detail than that, for example. But we do know that just qualitatively through my research and through speaking to different youth and their families, that negatively affects pretty much all the opportunities for improvement that I highlighted. So they are disproportionately at risk for experiencing all of those, as are other equity deserving groups. Thanks.
That's what I would have expected, but I just wondered if you had sort of thought about that. The other question I had has to do with the youth aged 18 to 24. I mean, that's a huge challenge. And I even noticed when I was president of a neighborhood association, even, you know, when you get up to the 16, 18 age group, it's very hard to do that outreach. So what do you suggest in 3 seconds? No.
Yes, so through you, Mr. Mayor, so that was something that the quantitative data did clearly show, was that as youth get older, pretty much all the outcomes that we look at for mental health and well-being get worse. So in terms of suggesting solutions for that, I think one of the things that so the Youth Drop-In Center, what I heard a lot was that need for academic and employment assistance, that was a really big stressor for this population, as well as socializing and making friends, especially when you move out of school and transition to the workforce. Oftentimes that was difficult for them. And then, so I think in terms of solutions, just expanding on the current, what I call safe places of belonging that exist for this population, through things like the Youth Drop-In program, but also strengthening supports that already exist, more funding, more resources, and expanding them in a way that's accessible to this population, especially in terms of place-based work, such as in neighborhoods or in housing complexes where this population is found.
Right, and I think that's key as well. That's all I have. Those are my questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Chapman. Councillor Marsh, you're up next.
Thanks very much, through you, Mr. Mayor. So thanks so much for bringing this forward. This is very timely. I'm just curious about whether or not you have recommendations for how to measure the outcomes of some of these, recommendations if they get implemented.
Mm-hmm. So I think in terms of evaluation and monitoring and evaluation outcomes, through you, Mr. Mayor, my apologies.
Don't worry.
So I think that would highly depend on exactly how the implementation plan for these recommendations plays out. And there's a reason I included so much co-creation with youth in these solutions, because I think obviously they are the ones with the most expertise about how to best design these to be most helpful for youth. In terms of the outcomes, though, I definitely think surveys like the Youth Impact Survey could be really powerful in terms of a survey that's already ongoing and regularly collected that could be leveraged to see if we have impacts on the different mental health and well-being outcomes that we see. But also, of course, program level impacts, both quantitative and qualitative, because I feel like even in public health, a lot of times we focus a lot on the quantitative, but qualitative is just as important.
That's really great to hear. And have you, in your studies, you're focused on youth outcomes, and I'm just wondering if there's any parallel looking at community outcomes, sort of just how the whole community benefits when youth benefit. Is that out of the scope of your work?
So, through you, Mr. Mayor, that is technically, I guess, out of the scope of this particular project, but from my classes and just training, yes. The answer is yes, that there is definitely a connection between the outcomes of youth and women in particular. Those are two groups of the population that have a big effect on overall community well-being.
Okay, great. I'll have some questions of staff. I don't know when you want me to ask those.
We'll come back to those
Okay,
after
thank you.
questions of Brianna. Next up, I have Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you so much, Ms. Acosta, for this report. I've been waiting to hear about it. I know that you've been really doing some exciting work, and your focus on the social determinants of health and in our youth is so important. Just reading in the record today, another study from the University of Waterloo, who has been looking at youth over the last year as well, and one of the quotes was, the alarms that they're finding is that what they're finding around subgroup results are like a house on fire. And we've heard from the Public School Board as well recently with a number of reports that they've done and what you're doing here. So I think we've heard so many reports lately. I like that you have actionable items and that you're really encouraging the youth to be a part of it, because they absolutely have to be. I'm wondering if, from what you've been looking at, how do we bring all these different reports together that we're hearing from everyone saying the house is on fire? Is there ways that that maybe you've identified that the city can be working with these other groups? And you know, reports are great and they're absolutely needed, but how do we move together? We're all seeing this as a problem. How do we pull this together?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you so much for your question. To answer your question, that was essentially part of what my job was. Once I got here, I realized there was no need to reinvent the wheel, no need to build from the ground up. There was so much information already out there. So I really saw my job as being the thread between all these different partners, all these different initiatives that are focused on youth or well-being or similar related topics. So I think really just continuing that aim at coordinating better all these different systems and reports and initiatives was one of the major findings of my topic, and that's kind of what the centralized database tries to get at, right? That's one small piece of a huge systems coordination issue, but I will say I did note some barriers that I heard from partners, such as just lack of like different organizations have different sources of funding, so they have different regulations on what they can work on, issues of who's going to take the lead, whose job is it, just things of that nature, as well as, normal political dynamics and things. So I think there are a lot of barriers, and I don't pretend to know how to solve them, these very complex problems, but I do think I'm glad that you noticed that, because that definitely is something that I noticed in my research.
Yeah, thank you. I will have some questions of staff as well. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Councillor Singh, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I really appreciate this report, because I think coming out of the pandemic, mental health is a serious crisis, and ensuring that we mitigate some of those issues amongst the youth, I think is a very important aspect of all orders of government, and I think municipal level has an important role to play. So I love the recommendations related to the youth, and youth should not only be considered up to the age of 18 or so, but we should have programming for years past that, especially for respect to mental health. So these are issues across the board, but while certain areas of our community are tackling these issues far more than others. So if you can go into detail a little bit more of an equity-based resource prioritization, so that we ensure that we're capturing those that are most severely at risk. And again, the aspect of equity.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, thank you for your question. So just to clarify the question, are you asking specifically about my solution surrounding the RISE Fund and creating a dedicated stream, or just
I really
in
think
general?
it should need, yeah, in general, across the
Okay.
board. I think that's just one thing that we can touch on, so you can, elaborate more. That's helpful. But I think it's everything, right? Of all the recommendations that are more youth-centric, but should we approach it with more of a critical consideration when we look at adopting these recommendations within, in future budgets? But more importantly, should they be better balanced where the need arises more to make sure we're giving the best benefit? Yeah.
Yes, thank you for your question. So, through you, Mr. Mayor. So, to answer your question in regards to really all of the solutions, because equity was a key principle that I used in this work, really they all, I feel, depend heavily on the solutions surrounding city communications with youth, and that being very well done in an equity-focused and intersectionality-focused way, because the city does offer very robust youth programming and services as it is, but I think part of the issue is youth knowing about it, having access to it, which also speaks to the youth engagement principles of paying youth, providing transportation. So it's really a lot of these social determinants of health that cause these equity-deserving youth to have greater needs in the first place, to have a harder time getting access to help for their needs, and it just continues the current situation. So I think the RISE solution in particular is really powerful because it literally puts money in the hands of youth and allows them to really implement their own ideas for how to improve their own well-being. I want to recognize that youth themselves are an equity deserving group in and of themselves, you know, even if they're not part of other marginalized groups. And so empowering them, recognizing their agency, and respecting them enough to have them lead the change that they want to see in the world, I think is really crucial. And then the other part that I want to quickly mention is just that of organizations that are led by equity deserving groups. They also face the same discrimination and barriers to leading the change they want to see in the world that, you know, the individual community members do.
Okay, Councillor Ioannidis.
Thank you, Mayor Verbanvik, and thank you so much for your presentation today. There's a lot of crucial and critical information in here, and it's so valuable. It's, as even Councillor Singh had mentioned, such a crucial time period with dealing with the pandemic. And I guess my one question would be more directed towards that forgotten group, the group of 18 to 24, because it seems like to me that is bang on, I would think, because it's everyone thinks, oh, you're 18, forget about you, kind of thing. You're an adult now. So, when you were going through your discussions, what I see some of the solutions that you were saying in your report is, what I saw was a drop-in centers or something like that. Can you just elaborate a little bit more about that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you for your question. Yes, definitely. So that was actually an idea that, of course, came from youth themselves. So they envisioned it as being a study space, a place to get resume help, to have career panels, to explore their options there, to receive mentorship from different safe and caring adults, but also to have options to just relax and de-stress through recreation and different wellness activities. So they saw it as a balance of all of those things. And the drop-in part is specifically a part of it because a lot of times these youth, they work, they go to school, they have maybe unpredictable schedules, and having to register for a set program was not something that kind of was convenient for a lot of them. So they imagined a youth drop-in. And this was particularly, also they emphasized that they wanted it to be year-round, especially during the winter months, because that's when so many other supports are maybe not available or things of that nature.
Okay, great. And I really appreciate the clarification that you did on with the mental health medical kit or metal. Yeah, I really like that. I was going to ask that, so I'm glad you addressed that. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, next up we have Councillor Schneider.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you so much for all the work that's gone into this. I think it's really well thought out, a lot of collaboration, and I love the fact that you really want to have the youth tell us what their needs are instead of us trying to figure that out. Going to the family-friendly systems and Solution 6, making the navigation of access and supports easier for youth and families. I love that approach because I think in all this, parents need a lot of help too. Like, I'm a parent of a 20-year-old step-parent, and knowing what to do when they get to all these resources, but when they get home, will there be help and support available for the parents too? I think parents really want to be able to help and sometimes just don't know how in an ever-changing world.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you so much for your question. The short answer is yes, definitely. I didn't have time to go too into detail during the presentation, but part of that recommendation of facilitating navigation and access is parental support because, my research and just the research in general, the literature shows that youth really are only as well as their caretakers, if they're their parents or other individuals. And so that was something that, in speaking to parents, they really expressed a desire and a need for. And like I said, especially the parents of racialized and LGBTQ+ individuals, in terms of the stigma of being part of the LGBTQ plus community, in terms of racialized families, just navigating the balancing of two cultures oftentimes, because those families are often immigrant families, and oftentimes they may not know where to seek support. They may not feel comfortable seeking what they call mainstream support. They really need culturally relevant supports. And so, yes, to answer your question, parents are definitely included, and I would love to see even more parent and family initiatives happen other than what I recommended.
Yeah, I think that's really crucial. You know, there's so many, that 18 to 24 group that forgotten, many of them are still living at home. So it's a whole new world for parents too. And I think ways for parents to understand the children and children to understand the parents and support each other. I just love where this is going, and can't wait to see some of this be implemented to what we can here as a city. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Schneider. Councillor Marsh, your questions for other staff? One more for Brianna? Okay, go ahead.
Thanks. It's just a follow-up question. So, well, actually, I want to applaud whoever decided to invite our MPs locally. That's a good idea. And I just also was wondering if there's been any opportunity for you to engage with the region, since the region has the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan that, as my understanding, is going to be discussed soon. Would you be able to comment on that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, thank you for your question. The answer is yes. I did engage with several entities at the regional level, including the Waterloo Region Public Health and Emergency Services, as well as the Smart Waterloo Region Innovation Lab, which really focuses, all they do is youth-driven projects. And then in addition, like you said, the Wellbeing Waterloo Region was a key resource for me. I met with Paige specifically, and as I don't know if you saw in my longer report, I actually explicitly recommend that the implementation of these solutions be coordinated with anything that comes out of the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan, since that was already established and covers many of the same issues that I identified. And again, that speaks to the issue of systems coordination, and I think that would be a really ripe area to lean on in terms of
Awesome. Thank you so much. You know what? Being in a two-tier system has its benefits, but it also has its drawbacks, and so that's. Thank you for your work in collaborating as much as possible with the other, and hearing from the other levels of government. But I do think that they would benefit too from hearing from you in your report and your recommendations, because some of them could be implemented by them as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Marsh. Brianna, I have just one question before we go to questions of other staff. And the one question I have is, obviously the report was written in the context of the limited time frame you had. If you were to sort of say, had I had more time, what are the 1, 2, or 3 sort of top things you would have liked to have dug into deeper had you had additional time?
I would have loved to explicitly identify the way, through you, Mr. Mayor. I would have loved to explicitly identify the ways that this work could be coordinated with the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan. Unfortunately, I just ran out of time to do that. I would also have loved to speak to youth groups, equity-deserving youth groups that I didn't have, unfortunately, represented directly in my sample of participants, including those who are homeless, those who use substances, those who come from single-parent households, and analyze a bit deeper how that can affect youth's mental health and well-being. But also, I think the other piece is more parent engagement. I think, as people have spoken to, that the parents are a crucial piece of this puzzle that cannot be left out. And while I do believe that youth-driven solutions are the way to go, I think, especially for parents of a lot younger children, the parents are really the ones that we need to be working with. And then in terms of, let's see if I had more time, I would definitely have liked to flesh out my report. I know it's very long as it is, so apologies, but I would have loved to flesh it out even more because there was so much richness of data that I received that I wanted to put on paper, but again, just time.
No, fantastic. And I think, I intentionally asked that question because as as council looks at the recommendation, which includes receiving the report and directing staff to look at an implementation plan, I think part of what to think about is also what are some of the other areas that we would have maybe, had we had that more time, wanted to dig in deeper and explore if that can become part of that implementation plan going forward. Okay, questions of other staff? Councillor Marsh. Oh, Councillor Chapman, actually, you were first in the queue.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just thinking back to many years ago. There used to be a drop-in center at Bright Up Park that was pretty, if I'm not mistaken, was youth-run and quite popular, and it no longer exists. And I don't know, somebody else who's been around as long as I have can maybe help me understand, is this something that would, like it was its own entity, right? Its own space. It was like a little cabin, and nobody else remember it? Or you must remember it, Mayor. Okay, because Lori's looking a bit puzzled.
No, I mean, we did have youth drop-in programs at a variety of community centers across the city.
Yeah, but this wasn't the center. This was a cabin that was up on the top of the hill at Bright Up Center. And it was just I don't know if they ended up having problems there, but I'm just wondering if something like that is at all, something to consider. And again, my biggest concern is the 18 to 24. And not my biggest concern, but I certainly see that as a concern.
Ms. Pawlowski?
Thank you. Through the chair. I think unique programs right now for young people that sort of meet their needs, that are place-based, that include sort of safe spaces, like sort of the example. It's not coming to mind, but I'm going to keep thinking. Like you're talking about, are going to be really is something staff is going to need to turn their mind to as we sort of think about programming past what our programming looks like now. And that includes sort of youth-friendly spaces where youth can feel comfortable and have access to allies. Yeah, there's a safety piece, and I'm confident that we can work around some of those things, and we have a lot of partners that will assist us, but that model where youth can claim a space where something seems youth-friendly and safe, I think it's something we're going to be challenged to think about moving forward.
Yeah, especially if we talk about, youth-led initiatives, and I think that's key. Anyway, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks. Councillor Marsh.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to ask staff about whether or not there's already been a connection with the one of the 8 recommendations out of the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Task Force to work on a youth initiative, and so it feels like this is sort of hitting that target without necessarily intending to. Can you speak to that?
Absolutely. Through the chair, thank you for the question. There's such an opportunity right now. Sometimes it's about opportunity, right? And timing. Sorry if that's me. Okay. A lot of the work coming out of both the strategic plan related to equity. One talked about youth mentorship. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there, as well as how we're hiring young people and sort of the barriers to employment. So we have met with the Equity Office. We see the alignment. We see the alignment too across the corporation when we look at the young people who are hiring in the aquatics area and the sport area. So yes, we see doing these things in tandem, moving forward together.
Great. Yeah, that sounds wonderful. So has your team considered, as you're thinking about implementing some of the recommendations, has your team considered collaborating with the Waterloo Region Wellbeing Group and potentially the new upstream initiative that has been given over to Community Justice Initiatives as the Crime Prevention Council was dismantled. Yeah.
Through the chair, absolutely. You know, if we look at one of sort of the positive outcomes of the COVID-19 pandemic has been, from a staff perspective, the system planning, the relationship building, the coordination, the collaboration at these tables. So, and again, it's about an opportunity. And I think that what we've been able to do over the last 2 years is develop relationships like we've never developed before. And part of that has included us sitting at these tables, Waterloo, you know, my position and other positions, and it's leveraged sort of that opportunity to move things quicker than maybe we were able to do before. So this project, when I was able to share sort of where we were going, I went right to Wellbeing Waterloo Region, went right to the Children Youth Planning Table, went right to the new Crime Prevention Council, and everybody was very receptive, wanted to be included, both in the development as well as the implementation. So I don't see us moving forward without many of those key stakeholders that we've talked about today and others.
That sounds great. I'd love to see also, you know, it might be too ambitious, but to start out this way, but I really think that if we can look at how these new programs are able to have positive impact on the community as a whole over the long term, I think that that would be really key to at least take note of now, look at some indicators and then look at how they might change over the long term. It's an opportunity that I just wanted to flag. Great. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Marsh. Councillor Schneider.
Thank you, Mayor. One of the things that something that I'm hearing is some of the programs, like the free transit, would be more regional. And I don't know if there's, like, the discussion is that we pay for this, or would the region be part of this? So it's kind of piggybacks on Councillor Marsh's, the collaboration with the region and maximizing our investment as much as possible. Is that probably going to be discussed?
Through the chair, absolutely. I think when we look at barriers to accessing services, transportation is always sort of the top, whether we're looking at counseling or recreation. And in these discussions, we've heard from our counseling partners, for example, that they are providing bus tickets, example, for a young person to get to counseling or to get to high school. And that's just not going far enough. So while that allows them to get to one appointment, it doesn't allow them to drop off resumes or do all these other things when we look at well-being as a whole. So having these discussions, the region's been at the table, City of Waterloo's been at the table, so we all acknowledge this, we hear this, but we also know that City of Guelph just tried a pilot project this summer looking at providing free transportation for young people. So even if we start small, we pilot something and use those outcomes, as Councillor Marsh talked about, as indicators to think about, did this have an impact? Then we might be able to go a little further. Maybe we can apply for a grant. So there's a lot of opportunities there. We did hear from our youth staff as well that, you know, they might live out in Bridgeport area, but if they were offered a job at Dune Community Center, they just don't have the transportation to get there. So we were hearing that from our young staff as well as our youth participants. So it's something to look into and bring back with further information, but partners absolutely at the regional level.
Yeah, it's great to hear the desire to remove the roadblocks, and I was excited to see your passion when we're talking about all the opportunities with our great community centers and equity, diversity, inclusion, Indigenous. There's a lot of opportunity and a lot of knowledge with our own staff to really make a huge impact. So thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Schneider. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you, I'm going to ask the same question that I did before, and it does piggyback on what Councillor Marsh had asked as well, which is about kind of pulling together all the different organizations. I think that when we read all the various reports, that if people have been keeping up on them, it's overwhelming. The news is bad for our youth, and it really is something that we need to put our heads together. I think there's lots of money that's available, and I think if we coordinated that money, then we would go a lot further. So my question would be around the use of the community centers, which I think is amazing. anybody who goes and as counselors, when we visit our community centers and we see the young people that have hope, that this is a center of hope in their neighborhood where they're able to have recreation and programming and people that care about them there. Would we be able to be the conduit for bringing together these different groups and having it be the center where this programming and where hopefully some of this money that's there from the other groups can be spent?
Through the chair, I think if I understand the question, I want to make sure I give you the information you're looking for, is sort of that opportunity to use our community centers, but also our open spaces, our arenas, our pools, as opportunities to, be that one door in, that one call in, that one email in for young people. There's a lot of players and partners right now in that space when you look at access to information, and I can think of a few right now. And so while we're really mindful of not trying to step on toes or work in people's space, we also want to coordinate and collaborate, and everybody agrees to that. There's a ton of opportunities in our city facilities, and we just need some time to really figure that out. And even in the online presence too, there's a lot of work locally that I think we can do there, as well as the physical space. Young people are coming to us.
You're absolutely right. I mean, when you go to our community centers and you see the students that are using and the trust that they have in that center of their community, I think it makes a natural sense to be using that. And sometimes maybe, I don't want to step on anyone's toes either, but sometimes it's all right to say, hey, bring it. We're happy to receive that help and be putting it in a place where people already trust what's going on.
Mr. May, you, just hang on one second. You lit up. Did you want to add something?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So through you, I just want to put a finer point on it. I really appreciate the question. What we have in spades is extra space in our community centers. What we don't have is expertise to do this programming. What I've become absolutely convinced of through the work that Ms. Acosta has done is that there's an expertise to designing and running these programs, and we don't have it. And so I think the space is not going to be an issue. It's about bringing in that expertise, whether that's an external partner or somebody else, and then things will really happen.
Councillor Singh.
Yeah, thank you. I think Councillor Johnston touched on part of my question, and Mr. May, thank you for that elaboration. And I agree with you that space necessarily isn't the problem, but my question lies that on top of the space, when you have programming, then you need facilitation of that programming as well. And then resourcing is likely a problem. So when it comes to resourcing, rather than us hoping to wait that our other regional, provincial, federal partners can see, a benefit through collaboration, or there's some sort of program they themselves are working on, and then we can apply for some sort of funding. Are we considering active approaching, the other orders of government? We're looking at our colleagues from the federal level and saying, hey, we're doing something unique. We got great ideas. We have a community center model that's, best to none and quite unique to our own community. This is something that we can take it to the next level. And can we be a pilot? Are we seeking those opportunities proactively?
Through the chair, I see that as our next step in the implementation, is really looking at sort of the opportunities provincially, and federally, to see where there's some opportunities either for funding or for research. So that's the next step, absolutely. I hope to have more information for you when we come back.
Okay, it looks like those are all the questions that everyone had. Ms. Pawlowski, you clicked in?
Well, I didn't get a chance, but I did want to, on behalf of the staff, really say thank you to Brianna. She has done a tremendous job, and I have to say, when Mr. Chapman and the mayor and I were interviewing candidates, we all know we have sort of this Kitchener way of doing things where we believe in equity and we believe in collaboration and not reinventing the wheel. And we interviewed Brianna, and right away, we knew that Brianna was a right fit for us, and I just wanted to thank you for all your work. So thank you.
Wonderful, and I too want to echo that. It's been wonderful having you in the community, and hopefully you've had an opportunity to to not only experience Kitchener, but a little bit of this part of Ontario as well. I know you got down to Niagara Falls, and hopefully had an opportunity to do some other things on different weekends and so on. And I mean, this is a great body of work that certainly will make a difference in the lives of young people. I know over the last while I've had an opportunity to talk to a lot of young people, to parents and so on, and there's no question that the last 2.5 years have been challenging for many people, and everybody's journey's been a little bit different. You know, some folks it's just been, you know, the lack of connection, like many of us felt. For others, it's been more significant, and some of them have, you know, sadly gone to a really dark place in terms of their personal journeys. And I think if we, as a city, can do a small part to make that better, together with other partners, it'll have a long-lasting impact, and that really is important going forward. Councillor Ioannidis. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt, but I just wanted to add a little comment with regards to echoing most of your comments, but more particularly focusing of our youth. And, you know, the youth, I feel, have been really, really impacted. And these are going to be our future leaders, and they're going to be our future visionaries and everything else. And we really need to look after them. And I'm glad we have our federal representatives here to listen to this. And hopefully there'll be some more really good news to come out of this, and look forward to it. And Brianna, I'm just wondering if you're ever thought about moving here now, since you've experienced.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So, yes, you're not the only person who has told me that. But I just wanted to say thank you to all of you for giving me the opportunity to do this incredible work. As a young person who has lived experience with mental health challenges, this was a very meaningful project for me. And I really brought all I had to this work, as I do with all the work that I engage in. And I just wanted to kind of echo some of the thoughts that were expressed around these are not only Kitchener issues. These are really systemic issues that, you know, unfortunately in my scope of work, I had to really narrow down on Kitchener, but I think broader collaboration, broader coordination on all of these systems-wide issues is a must, and the City of Kitchener can play a huge role in advocacy. So the timer. Oh, is the timer not?
Yeah, don't worry about the timer. I kind of I messed that one up.
Could play a huge role in advocating specifically at higher levels of government. And I think the idea of Kitchener being a pilot city for all of this incredible work is really, really the way to go. And then finally, I just want to say that on behalf of all the youth that I spoke to and all the surveys of youth that I analyzed, youth are ready for change now, not in a couple weeks or months or years. They want change now, and they want not just talk of change, you know, actual action. And so that was really the main takeaway that I got from this project. So I'm so happy to have your support, and I hope that this goes to amazing places after I leave. And I really tried to build as much infrastructure in terms of partnership and things like that as I could while I'm here, so that way it has the best chance of going forward when I leave. Thank you so much.
Wonderful, thanks, Brianna. Councillor Galloway-Sealock, I know you've been our kayak rep on council. Would you care to bring forward or move the recommendation?
Yeah, it would be my pleasure to bring this forward. I think it's, as has been said, incredible work, and I think that we need to take this and move it forward and make it a priority moving forward.
Wonderful. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Singh, thank you. We can have a recorded vote. We get to use our buttons again. Haven't done that in a while. So recorded vote has been called. If people are, Madam Clerk, if you can indicate when you're ready. We've started, okay, people can vote, please. And that is carried unanimously. Wonderful. Thanks, thanks again, Brianna. I know you're going to be finishing up over the next few days, and then heading back down to, I guess technically it's Cambridge, right, or Boston?
Boston.
Boston. I was trying to remember which side of the border it was down there in terms of the communities. You know, we wish you all the best in your ongoing studies, and don't be a stranger. You know, let us know how you're doing, and we'll certainly let you know how this work is moving forward. And I do want to thank MPs Mike Morris and Val Bradford for joining us here today, as well as those MPs and MPPs that have joined us virtually for today's session on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, council colleagues, we'll now move on to the other items on the special council agenda. Next, we have the noise exemption for the Yeti music event. Does someone care to move that? Councillor Marsh, do I have a seconder? Councillor Ioannidis, thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. Next up, we have the Sydney Street North reconstruction. Do I have a mover? Councillor Galloway-Seelock, do I have a seconder? Councillor Schneider, thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor? Oh, Councillor Gazzola, you have a question? Please go ahead.
I'm not sure if I have the right one, but this is a project that's 30% over budget. Am I correct on that?
Who wants to tackle that? Mr. Lautenbach.
So, through the mayor, it's correct, this is an over-budget project. By the amount indicated in the report, $573,000. There is funds within the WIP account to cover this overage, and because it was a competitive tender with 6 bids, the recommendation is still to proceed with the road reconstruction.
Do we have any other alternatives?
This is work that needs to proceed, and so the department's indicated that given that it was a number of bids that were received, it is work that should proceed this year, and so that is a recommendation for you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Gazzola. So it has been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. Next item up is Dune Village Road Bridge Rehabilitation. Do I have a mover? Councillor Johnson, seconder. Councillor Galloway-Seelock, thank you. Any discussion? Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, this one's 38% over. Is there any alternative here? Do we have any other opportunities or what?
Mr. Reedman.
Yeah, through the mayor, we did have 2 bids on this. While one was disqualified, the 2 bid amounts came in at approximately the same rate, and so the recommendation is to move forward with this. Given that it's a bridge repair, delaying it, could be risky for council.
Oh, click in again, Councillor Gazzola, please. Whoops, sorry. Go ahead, ask that question.
Could you expand on risky?
Yeah, through the mayor, so these bridges were built in 1924 and 1929, and so rehabilitation is recommended for them. And so given the age of the structures, proceeding and given that the bids are close, one didn't have relevant experience related to bids or to bridge construction, but they did bid close to the other bidder who does have experience. And so based on that, we recommend proceeding with the work.
Okay, so it has been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. Motion to go in camera for the items listed. Councillor Johnson, seconded by Councillor Schneider. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. And motion to recess, because I think we might need to come back. Moved by Councillor Marsh, seconded by Councillor Schneider. All those in favor? Opposed? Let's try that again. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you.